inside the Islamic Republic of Iran. This is, of course, only one illustration, or bloodiest one so far at least, only one illustration of the commitment of the government of Iraq to expel the people of Ashraf, to commit the refoulement of the people of Ashraf in violation of the of all the refugee conventions and protocol and violations of customary international law. They have been saying this ever since the Americans left. They have been saying that their objective, the objective of the Mالكي government, is to make life so intolerable for the people of Ashraf that they would have no alternative but to leave. And since they are on the terrorist list in the United States, that provides perfect cover for the Iraqis, and that justifies the use of American Humvees, of American weaponry, of American training to commit the murders, some of which we just saw on that screen. There are three commitments that the world community simply must make as a result of what happened last week and in order to prevent its repetition. First is there must be protection provided to the people of Ashraf, and it cannot be entrusted to the Iraqi security forces. That is no longer in doubt. Protection must be provided, and the only entity with both the presence and the moral force to conduct that protection at present is the United Nations. Whether it's Yunamí or whether it is a United Nations detachment authorized for that purpose by the Security Council is a detail. The point is that the United Nations has a mandate now to insist that the people of Ashraf be protected. And the events of last week need to be investigated. They need to be investigated by an objective observer, certainly not the Iraqis, ideally by a UN agency or by some other well-recognized and well-reputed international organization. Thank you.
Thank you. First, what you saw on that screen was obviously organized and directed by the Iraqi government. It was no spontaneous action by the military. There were written orders that you have received copies of. It was cold-bloodedly planned in advance. Second, the residents of Ashraf need protection. They don't need resolutions. They don't need rallies. They need protection now, right away. Internationally, if possible, sponsored through the United Nations, but immediately. The investigation that is conducted, and there has to be an investigation conducted, will have to be conducted independently. If the Málكي government perpetrated this as a matter of official policy, obviously it can't be trusted to investigate itself. If further proof were needed, we need only reflect on the fact that a similar attack in 2009 was never investigated. In any event, Iraqi troops should be directed to leave the vicinity of Camp Ashraf and to leave immediately. And this is not an issue that engages the question of Iraqi sovereignty. In July of 2004, the residents of Ashraf received a written proclamation by the commander of multinational forces in Iraq confirming the signing of an agreement relating to their status as protected persons under the Fourth Geneva Convention. On July 21 of 2004, they got a letter signed by General Jeffrey Miller of the United States Army, who was Deputy Commanding General of multinational forces in Iraq, confirming that they are protected persons under the Fourth Geneva Convention. This is that letter. In 2009, General David Petraeus said that he relinquished control to Iraqi authorities only on the assurance required by international law that the status and security of residents of Ashraf would be protected. The United States take the position, if indeed it does, that this is now a matter of Iraqi sovereignty and is an internal matter for the Iraqis and to wash our hands. When that's done by a merchant, it's known as bait and switch, and it's against the law. When it's done by a country, it's also called bait and switch, and it's a blot on that country's honor. It's time for both the United Nations and the United States to act affirmatively. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge.
Years ago, during the Reagan administration, when I served as counsel to the U.S. delegation to the United Nations and frequently appeared at the UN Security Council and the UN General Assembly and various committees here, I never thought that I would be here today to express my regret and deep disturbance and indeed shame at certain actions taken by my own government. Bear in mind that the United Nations was the name chosen by the Western Alliance when they coalesced in 1942 to defeat the greatest tyranny then known to man, Nazi Germany. And it was to President Roosevelt's lasting credit that his vision of the United Nations survived beyond the war as an institution framed around a charter which would have as its membership all the nations of the world who were ready to commit to the non-use of force in international relations and respect for fundamental human rights. What would President Roosevelt think if he were here today, if he saw Iran flouting? And I say Iran because, as we know, Iran is responsible in great measure for what is going on in Iraq, flouting the very principles upon which the UN was founded through the export of violence abroad and the perpetration of tyranny at home, trampling the rights of its own citizens through torture and execution simply because they clamor for their human right of freedom of expression and democracy. And surely, once the U.S. Court of Appeals ruled that the State Department must make its case for de-designation or delist, he would most certainly not have allowed the State Department to engage in endless delay in making its own case when thousands of lives are jeopardized by the label. How can it be, with thousands of lives at stake and with the UK and EU courts having come to an opposite conclusion, for the United States to continue such a heartless, and I say advisedly, indeed shameless policy? Make no mistake about it. As someone who knew the face of fascism, President Roosevelt would have directly confronted Iran and called its government by its right name, a fascist state. Perhaps things will change. Perhaps the events at Camp Ashraf of this last month will serve as the final wake-up call for the atrocities at Ashraf. 34 murdered at point-blank range, which you have seen, more than 300 injured. Indeed, more than anything that occurred, as far as we know through any documented evidence, by Gaddafi's forces initially putting down the rebellion in Libya. All of this is evidence, if we need it, of the poison that is Iran today and how it has spread through Iraq. Our immediate task is to change things on the ground. First, to ensure that the injured get medical treatment and that Iraq never repeat what it did. The time has come not only to immediately delist the MEK, but to ensure that the United States and the international community, acting especially through the United Nations, fulfill their responsibility toward the people of Ashraf. Thank you.
Again. Let me simply add to my colleagues' comments by noting that in our time, most of the great human tragedies have been unforeseen. Our collective international conscience has been assuaged that from Cambodia to Rwanda to Bosnia, few could have predicted what occurred. Indeed, in recent weeks, from Tunisia to Egypt, and now the fighting in Libya, few would have predicted what has happened. That may help the collective conscience for the past. None of that's available here. What happened in Camp Ashraf was not only predictable, but probably inevitable. As Iraq falls under the sphere of influence of the mullahs in Tehran, they were always going to abuse and murder their political opponents. 34 people, refugees, were murdered. There are many culpable parties. The Iranians who ordered the attack, the Iraqis who conducted it. So unfair, it is so wrong, because we provided the weapons. There's nothing I can do about the policies of Iraq or Iran. There is certainly something we can all do about the policy of the United States. Getting the PMI off the foreign terrorist list so it is no longer used as an excuse for murder is the first order of business. But at least we're here to give testimony in this organization, lest no one lose sight of it, that we're all aware of it, who's responsible, that it is coming, that it is preventable, and we will sit here and wait and see whether anyone not only cares, but is prepared to do anything.